Ever come up with a really cool loop or phrase and thought, oh, that's a really cool loop or phrase. Now what? Repetition can be a really powerful tool in music, but I think it's most powerful when there's something in between the repetitions to kind of break up the monotony, some sort of contrasting section. So the problem is the contradiction. Should we do something totally different than our A section and risk it sounding like it doesn't belong in the piece that we've already written? We don't want that. Or do we do something that's too similar to our A section and therefore doesn't provide any contrast at all and nothing fresh for the listener, and so it just sounds repetitive? Usually at this point we're so far in our own heads that we've already lost the battle. Well, if it isn't my old nemesis, the dreaded B section. As I've thought about how to explain B sections to other people, I've realized that I've never really heard an explanation that makes complete sense to me. There's always this built-in contradiction, which is kind of the point, it turns out. But that took me years to figure out and a lot of trial and error, and hopefully I can save you some time, so let's just keep it simple. A good B section really only needs to do two simple things. It needs to have some relationship to the existing material, and it needs to have some unique characteristic that distinguishes it from that section that we've already written. I'm going to use a recent piano release of mine as an example just because it's very clear and easy to see how I use these concepts. But the nice thing about it is it's kind of a universal concept that you can apply to any genre, almost. So I'll show you some examples in my more electronic work as well. Now, if we've taken the time to come up with really strong material for our A section, which is why we're here, we already have an A section or a loop or a sequence that we really like, one of the easiest and most effective things to do is just to mine that for strong material that we can use in some new way in our B section. Here's what I mean. Notice that the opening theme of my A section has this ascending G minor scale. What if I took that little idea and used it not as the main part of the B section, but as a transition in the B section? Now, this particular piece happens to have two themes within the A section. So what if I took that second theme of the A section and used it in some sort of transitional way or as a sequence? So rather than just reiterating these themes that I've already fully developed in the A section, I'm taking little snippets or just the gestures of those themes and using them in the B section in a new way. By the way, if you're a little confused by how to use musical form like this and break things down into sections that make sense with one another, I do have a free guide. It's a free downloadable PDF in the description. It's just a kind of a compositional guide that introduces some concepts that have helped me in composing music throughout the years. Another way that I've tied things together and kept things consistent throughout this piece is keeping that waltz accompaniment part that is steady in the left hand. So that just leaves us, well, how are we going to contrast the B section from the A section? Well, there are a couple of devices I've used for that. The A section had these sort of more traditional melody lines that kind of unfold over time and tell a story. The B section has this constant motion in the right hand. It has arpeggiated figures. It also has faster harmonic rhythm, which means that the chords are changing at a faster rate. Also, if we look at the shape of it, as opposed to that sort of upward trajectory that we had in the A section with that first melody, which is literally an ascending scale, we now have this sort of downward motion with these arpeggios. So we've got our contrasting elements, and we've also got our elements that are already familiar to the listener. And using existing material in new ways like this really has a dual benefit of giving you something to start with because you've already developed that material and it's already hopefully strong enough to stand on its own, but it also benefits the listener because they have heard that before, they're familiar with it, it gives them something to latch onto, but now you're using it in a new way. Now, let's say just for a moment that you don't care anything about writing piano waltzes, and that's fine, because I mentioned that this is a kind of universal concept that we can apply to other things as well. In electronic music, we have a totally different set of options to use in terms of creating variation. We can use sound design, we can use synthesis, we can use texture, we can use a variety of other production techniques to achieve variation. But we can still accomplish both of our two steps to write a strong B section, even though the tools may be a bit different. Step 1, something similar. In this particular track, the bed of sound is consistent throughout. You can hear all of these looping sequences, and sound design that I have going on is kind of a texture bed. When we're in the world of ambient drone, a lot of times you can have just one or two sort of pedal tones that sustain throughout an entire piece, but you can do things around that to create variation. So this is similar to our waltzing left hand in the piano piece that we looked at earlier. It's something that is constant throughout, that ties the whole thing together. Step 2, we need something different. The chords change in the B section, and their voicings change. The register changes, which just means that I change the range of where the synth part is happening. It drops an octave. The overall direction of the line changes, just like our B section in the waltz that we looked at. Now things are moving upward. And the harmonic rhythm also increases, which just means that the chords are changing at a faster rate in the B section than they were in the A section. Let's look at another example. Step 1, we need something similar. The right-hand synth part in this track keeps a pretty consistent pattern to it. Although it does have a melodic shape to it as the piece progresses, it keeps the same sort of pattern. Also, the two synth voices remain consistent throughout, so they are kind of an anchoring point for this piece, even though the harmonies change and there's no pedal tone that lasts throughout this entire piece. So how do we accomplish step 2 in this case? What makes it different? Obviously, as you can hear, I open things up dynamically and expressively as we progress into the B section of this piece. It grows in intensity, the melodic line reflects that, it increases in intensity as well by going into a higher range. And I also changed the bass part slightly. It's not a huge change, but it is just enough that by changing the bass part underneath, you kind of influence everything that happens over the top of that as well. By changing one bass note, you can change everything that happens above it. So this last example is a little bit different because I don't think it even has a B section, which brings up another question. Do you even need a B section to begin with? And that, of course, presents another problem of how do I keep the listener's attention and not bore them absolutely lifeless with just one section that keeps repeating over and over. In my next video, I'm going to dive deeper into this track and how I approach this more vertical, layered sort of arrangement. So if you'd like to see that, be sure to ring that subscribe bell notification or whatever I'm supposed to say at this point. And I'll also put it here in the end screen whenever I actually get around to making it.